about what's available to you. And I know I talked a little bit about Python versus Mel and the differences between Mel and Python. And while Mel is the basis of Maya's UI and all the code that you see flowing out of the script editor, and it's like I said, you could learn it, and it's good to learn it for the reason that it helps you translate the code that you're seeing as you do things in the scene, and it also helps you when you read other tools that were written so you can write equivalent Python. So it's good to look at how the Mel works, and you'll get a sense of that as you see the code flow out of the script editor, and you just know the difference between the flags, whereas Python just uses the keywords. But Python pretty much does everything that Mel can do, and a lot more overall, like having that OS module that we used. But another thing that's available in the latest, it's been integrated since Maya 2011. It's something called PyMel. And I'm just going to introduce what PyMel is, but I don't want to get too much into it. It's beyond the scope of this tutorial. But PyMel was developed by Luma Pictures, and they worked on it for so long that they ended up integrating it directly into Maya. People used to use it, install it, but now it's actually shipping with Maya. And the way you would get it is import. This is the common way people import pymel.core as PM, which just means that we're going to alias this pymel core submodule as the word PM, and it takes a second to load, but once you have it, the thing behind PyMel is it was an approach to make the Python side of coding more like Python and less a wrapper around Mel. So the idea is to make things more object oriented and more functionality. But the reason that I don't want to get into this, I don't recommend learning it to start because it's too much different than Mel, and I think it's important to learn the actual Python commands as opposed to learning something third party that could change over time. And also there's another reason is PyMel is significantly slower to process in terms of speed than just the straight commands module, because there's a lot more overhead. And I'll show you an example. The way we can make a node is PyNode. If we want to convert the name of a node into a PyNode, so I'm just going to take this file that we were working on earlier, and I can say file 58, and oops, I didn't spell that right. There we go. And that gives us back an object. Whereas before we were working on just strings, and strings can't do all that much, but these objects that they've written, let's see, let's call this our F node, and they make these smarter than the average string. There's a lot of stuff that goes into these, and basically what it goes into is instead of having to call commands get adder, we can just say F dot, and we know that this was called file texture name, this texture here. We know that was called. So all you have to do is say file texture name, and that under the hood does a get adder for you, but it doesn't even return the string path. It now returns an attribute object, and that attribute object can do everything you need it to do. And in this sense, we can just say get, and now we get the string to the full path. But this object can do everything. It can set connections from here to be driven by other properties. You can set this way, but that's the idea behind PyMel, is it's meant to make everything much more object oriented. And another reason that PyMel has its pluses is because it gives you access to what's called the Maya API, the plugin API, which is a lower level coding language where you can do it's usually you would use C++, but you can also use Python to access it, and that's where you can create your own custom nodes, and you get more advanced, and you can get into the lower levels of Maya, the things that the commands can't do, like you can get more control over the undo stack and things like that. But PyMel wraps all of that into these objects, which means there's a lot more overhead. It runs a bit slower, but it's it is significantly easier to use, but I recommend not learning it right now. You can get into it later to accomplish some more challenges, but we should kind of stay away from it for the moment. And the rule of thumb is if you want ease of coding, then you can use Pinode or PyML. But if you need speed, if you need to loop over lots of geometry and points and things that are doing lots and lots of loops, then PyML is going to be too slow. You're going to need to just stick with the commands that we've been using. So that's it for this part of the chapter. And what I want to talk about next is the Maya environment, how to set up Maya to be a little more useful with the code you're writing. So what I want to talk about this point is now that we've gone through how to use Maya with Python, and you know how to write your scripts, it's a little inconvenient the way we've been doing it to constantly load and save the scripts like this. I mean, it's a good way to use this for your editor and to save the scripts, but to load them back in and select your code and hit enter and commit them every time you want to access your tools is very inconvenient. So I want to talk a little bit about how to customize Maya's environment a bit to make things more convenient for you. And let's talk about the first thing is some special paths that Maya recognizes. So I'm going to open up the Maya help. I had it open because it takes a little while to load, but if we search for file path variables, the first result we get is it's got a list of paths in here. And these are all paths that Maya looks at. And the important one is the Python path. And for Windows, and it's different for Linux and OS X, but these are the order of paths that Maya will check for Python scripts. And it's the same with Linux. And they don't put scripts at the end here, but I don't know why, maybe it's a typo, but there should be a scripts directory. And this is what I'm going to use. Home directory, library, preferences, Autodesk, Maya, 2011, scripts. And what I want to do first is, if you remember, this is for our learning purposes. When I type commands, now I have commands, but if I hadn't imported, I would have gotten an error, because I had to do import maya.commands as commands. And we can first off make that a little more convenient for us. So let's open up a shell, and I'm already in my Maya scripts directory, and I have nothing in here, but there's a special file that Maya will look for when it's starting up, and that's called user setup.py. that you can also do mel, and it will look for one of those, but it'll only run one if you have it. So let's just do user setup.py, and you can use whatever editor you want. I'm using this in a terminal, but what I can put in here is import Maya commands as commands. I'm just going to keep that in here. Now you can use this for all kinds of more advanced things, like adding paths to where Maya will look for these if you're going to set up a network and have a bunch of artists pulling from a single path, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're trying to learn here. This is just for our personal use, and you can look into that more or wait for the intermediate level class to talk about that. But we're just going to put this in here for now. So we have this file that has that one line in it, and if we reload Maya, the scripts editor will always have that commands module available. And now what I want to do is bring over our scripts that we made. Now you remember the create spiral and the gain lights function, and what I did was when we were paused, I made this learning module with just copy and pasting these two pieces of code into here. And I'm going to show you. That's all I did, was just paste these commands in here, and then I cleaned it up a bit, and you can see what I did here was, this is called a doc string, and all it is some help. You see when we did the help command, we would get some output. You can put anything you want between these quotes, and this is an example of how to do that at the top of your function, to put some help in there. And I just cleaned it up a little bit. But one thing that this tool is missing is when you run these inside of Maya, you're running them in the main, what's called the main namespace of Maya, the global namespace, where it had the import command statement. But when you're going to bring it in through a script like this, you should always do import Maya commands as commands, because what lives inside here only lives in this file. When I make gains lights, it's in this file. When I make these variables, it's in this namespace. So you need to make sure to import all the modules you use. If you were to use the OS, you need to import the OS module. So you need to do your imports right here at the top of the file. So this one's usually the most important for writing these Python commands. So I'm going to save this. Right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it over. So I've got these two files now. I've got my learning module. I've got my user setup py. And what I'm going to do is go back over to Maya. And I'm going to say import learning. Now learning came in. What's inside learning? There's our two functions that we made. They live inside the learning module, and we can access them just like we've always been doing with the dot. So let me go back here. And before I do that and clear the scene, I just wanted to say a thanks to my buddy Edwin Porfert for donating this scene. He created all this and gave it to me to use freely and distribute it for you guys to use in the examples. So thanks again, Ed Porfert, for designing the scene and giving it to me to use. So also before we clear the scene, let's also try our gain lights method. So you remember we had learning, gain lights, right? And if we do help learning gain lights, there's our help on how to use the gain lights. And it takes the list of lights, takes the float, and to use gain lights, we need to get our lights. And this gets all the lights in the scene, right? And then we just pass that in to learning.gain lights. And we'll gain it up by 2.2. And all we had to do in starting this new scene was import our learning module, and we have all our tools. And so you can also do the, let's clear the scene here. We can also do learning create spiral with the default options. And there's our spiral. We didn't even have to type out or load any code, just import that learning module. So you can see how setting up the environment makes your developing a lot easier. And you could pass this learning module over to other people to put in their scripts directory, or set up a common shared one, which is a little more advanced. But you see how now all you got to do is write new functions and drop them into that module, or make new modules and name them however you want. And once you have these functions that you can access, then we can actually make a shelf button. So if we go over here and we say the shelf editor, and we bring up our shelf editor, let's put it over here. And if we go to, let's create in our custom, I already had this, but I'm going to delete this here. Right? Huh, won't delete it. Well, let's create a new one anyway. Let's say create spiral. Right? So we've got the spiral. We could set an icon, but we won't do that right now. We'll go in here, and it's asking you if you want Mel or Python. In this case, we want Python. They give you some temporary code. You put it in there, and all we have to do is put in learning create spiral. And that's going to call it for us. So we can go back over here, save all shelves, and we get another icon, and I can close this down. I can do the scene over, and I can run that, and I get nothing. There we go. You get create new spiral. I had the wrong icon. So you can see how you make buttons out of your commands now, and you can make as many as you want with all your functions and put the variables in there. And that pretty much does it for learning Python. And we have, I'll do a little bonus information after this about creating a simple UI, just to give you enough to understand how to bring up a little pop-up and give you some options for your spiral. So we won't go into too much detail about that, but that'll be next. Alright, so to finish out this tutorial, I wanted to give you a little bit of a bonus chapter to just show you a bit of how to create a dialogue to wrap around one of the commands we made. And this is bonus because I don't want to go into too much detail because it's a whole nother section on how to work with designing UI, and it's all in the help document, the commands, the Python commands document that I showed you. But I'm going to include the script with you with the project, so you can check it out. But let's just take a look at what I threw together. I'm just going to go into File, Load Script, and I created this script for you while I was away, and I'll include it. It's the create spiral win to accompany our create spiral. So I'm going to load it, and it's a little bit more code than we've seen before, but I'm going to go through it and just tell you what I wrote, and you can examine this in your own time and play around with it. But what I've got here is I've got our basic import commands like we always need. I've got our import learning because we wrote our learning module that had our create spiral command in it. It could have been also called create spiral because we have that in there as well, but we'll call it learning. Oops, did I get rid of that? Let's get that back. Yeah, so we've got our function that we made, and I called it create spiral win, just so we know that it's this command, but it opens a window. And the first thing it does is it creates a window for us, and with a title and a default width and height. And then we add this thing called a column layout, which there's different types of layouts for all your little widgets in the window. And this basic type is called a column layout, meaning that all the following widgets that come after this will be vertical, just like this, until we move up a parent again. So we run this column layout, and there's some options on how to format it. And then we start creating widgets, and we create 4 field widgets. We create a float field, and you remember we had 4 arguments to our spiral. We had the amp, the spin, the count, and the width. So I'm going to create these float fields, and they have a label and a default value for these were all our defaults that matched our command. And so I'm going to create 4 of these. This one happens to be an int field because our count is how many spheres to use, and we only want to make sure they can pass in a whole number, not a half of a sphere. And so we've got these 4, and they're all going to be in a row. And then, and I'll explain what this is in 1 second, but we create a button, and this is our create spiral button. And one of the features of the button is you can specify the command to run when the button's clicked. So what I did here, and this could be a lot more advanced, but I'm trying to use just the absolute bare minimum Python that you could be familiar with to understand what I'm doing. Generally, you could spruce this up even more, but what I did was I created a function inside of my function. So this function only lives as long as this function is alive, and afterwards it goes away. But I create this function that calls another function with the name of my widgets. It calls it with the amp, spin, count, and width. So when I click this button, it's going to send the names of these widgets to this command, and we'll move down the code here. I create another button right here. That's the close button, and the command is to close the window. The other way you can specify a command is just by putting it in a string, like this. So one way is to create a real function object, and the other way is to actually put text into a string. So I pass this in here. So when I click this button, it's going to close the window. And the last thing I do is show the window. Now down here is a second function, do create spiral. And I reference that right here, and I pass it the names of the 4 widgets. And they come in here, and I get the value. And you can see I get the value because I use this flag called query equals true, and then I tell it what value I want to query. So for each of these, I'm getting the value of that field, and I'm storing it right here. And then I'm calling our, you remember this, our learning create spiral with our 4 values. So once I click the button, and let me show you, if I select all this, and hit enter, and then I run our window, we get a window, and the layout's very basic. I said it was a column layout, so everything's in a row. We've got our float fields, our int field, float field, and I can hit this create spiral. It creates our spiral with these values, and I could even change the amp. I could say the amp is 2, the spin is 15, 50, 2, and it makes another spiral. And then when I hit this button, it runs the delete window command that I had right here. And to make this part of our code just like we were doing in our previous examples, I am back in my scripts directory, and I copied it over into the directory. And these PYC files, if you see them, they're just the optimized files that get generated after you start running the commands. So don't worry about these; they get made automatically. But here's our create spiral win. So when I put it into this directory, it becomes available to where all I have to do is say import create spiral win, right? It imports it, and then I can call it. And the reason I have to do it like this is because, remember, I'm importing the module, and inside the module I had that function called create spiral win. So I can run this, and there's our dialog. And from here I could put this into a button. There we go. Let's see here. Now they're all coming up backwards. There we go. So now that's how we make a very simple interface to wrap around our very simple function. And at this point, I wanted to thank you for sticking with me through the command line Python and getting into the really cool stuff for learning Python in Maya, the intro course. I hope you learned a lot. My name is Justin Israel. Look for the future videos that we'll make to expand upon this topic, and good luck playing around. We'll include these project files with you, and we'll include any kind of contact information. If you have any questions, you can always email me, and I'll be happy to try and help you out. All right, thanks a lot.